recognize the gentlelady that represents Gator Nation, Ms. Cammack, who's a great friend of mine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, we do represent the Gator Nation, home to one of the best damn football teams in all of the nation, as well as a wonderful research institution. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your support, not just of the Gator Nation, but of this issue. I think it's critically important that we address this issue, and I feel like we've hit on all of the topics really in some way or another. So I do want to give you all the opportunity to narrow in on something that hasn't been addressed here yet today. But before I do, while you're thinking of that, I would like to ask you guys, particularly when we're seeing federal agencies collect data from various companies and then using that data in ways that may or may not, I'm not going to say ethical, but there's a bit of a gray area in how that data is being used. What are some of the national security implications for that data collection and then the subsequent breaches that we've seen? And I'll start with you, Ms. Rich, and then we'll go down the line.
Well, there's so many ways this has international implications. That's a big piece of this. For one thing, you know, U.S. companies are having serious problems in Europe because Europe believes that the U.S. doesn't have strong enough laws. It affects trade. It affects companies' ability to process European data, and then in the U.S. because they're not allowed to transfer it, which creates a lot of inefficiencies. So that's a serious trade and credibility issue we have. As we deal with issues of hacking and surveillance from other countries, there's not only is the data exposed, but we have very little credibility as we deal with those other countries. And, you know, it comes up, you know, in the TikTok situation, people talking about banning TikTok. Well, I think we'd have more credibility talking about that if we had a privacy law of our own. And then there's the costs of disproportionate costs on U.S. companies of complying with multiple laws.
And I appreciate that. I wanted to make sure I give Ms. Givens and Mr. Mudd an opportunity as well, as quickly as you can.
So I agree with my colleague, and I do think that the biggest risk to all of this is the unfettered collection, storage, and sharing of data, and that creates cybersecurity risks, it creates national security risks, and so that's why we have to pursue a framework that minimizes the amount of data that companies are collecting and storing and puts limits on how they can share that information.
Mr. Mudd?
Very much agree with that. In the tech world, we call that surface area, right? The more the data is out there, the bigger the risk, right? Data is infinitely replicable and can be stored at forever. And so, to the degree that we're able to limit it through technology, through regulation, then we reduce the risk, national security, and otherwise.
Do you think that we should require or have a way to incentivize that data servers be housed here in the United States as part of the national security framework when we're talking about housing our data? Ms. Givens?
I think that gets you into risky territory really quickly. And part of the reason is we need the global flow of information around the world. It's how the global internet functions. It's how we're able to communicate and do business with other nations. It's the way in which the U.S. has been a leader in innovation around the world is through that free flow of information. So instead of just throwing up firewalls, what we need is strong data protections across the board that make sure that everyone's following the same rules, as opposed to having to impose these really hard to enforce walls on data localization.
Something that I haven't heard yet today is the emergence of AI, ChatGPT, how AI is going to essentially revolutionize the data collection models, and what are some of the implications of using AI with some of these algorithms and these platforms. We can go down the line, and then I'll open it up to you in the 1 minute and 7 seconds that I have left. Ms. Rich.
One implication is this is an area where technology has become so sophisticated and the FTC laws, basic laws, can't get at it in the way they were able to get at issues earlier.
Thank you.
Congress is going to be grappling with this issue for a long time as AI transforms our society. One of the first things we need to do is just get a handle on which companies are using these tools and making sure that they're going through a responsible process when they're deciding how to design them and how to deploy them through impact assessments. And that's one of the provisions in the ADPPA and why it matters.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Mudd.
Would make 2 points. First, that regulating the use is really important, as Ms. Rich mentioned, and flexibility to adapt, to further use cases along the way is really important. The second is, I think that explicit bias detection can play a really meaningful role in this. And then the last would just be around transparency, right? Understanding when AI is at use, and so consumers have some understanding of the end result.
Excellent. My time has expired, so I'll have to yield back. So sorry.
Thank the gentle lady.
Maybe Mr. Obernolte will give you a few moments. Thank you. I yield back.
Very